Home Sunday. That was what it was always called when I was a child. I'm Carolyn Ruffles, if you don't know me. I'm married to Dick Ruffles, and we live on West King Street. A little of our history. My grandparents bought a farm on East Lake Road in the late 1800s. They sold that farm to the Patton family, Ibby and Jesse's in-laws, and they moved to East King Street, and then they moved to Ball Pond Road. And that's where my mom grew up with her siblings, and I also grew up there. Dick's grandparents bought a farm on West King Street in the late 1800s. So my mother and her siblings, Dick's father and his siblings, and the Patton kids all walked to church on Sunday morning for Sunday school and church. Now, did you ever wonder how this little church came about to be at the corner of King and South King? Well, I'm going to tell you. Now, Pastor Paul told me people don't like to hear about the past, so feel free to have a nap if it doesn't interest you. In the winter of 1822-23, two preachers of the Christian faith, Abigail Roberts and Levi Hathaway, visited this area, preaching a very simple faith of God, His Son Jesus, and the Scriptures. This appealed to the hard-working farmers around this area, and they decided they wanted to do something about it. In 1830, 8 people gathered together to form the first Christian church of Southeast, which is Brewster, Danbury, and Patterson. One of those 8, Aaron Pierce, has this picture in the library. But if you look at his face, he sure doesn't look very happy. I don't think he was filled with the joy, but I think that's the way they had their picture taken back then. And he was a forebearer of the Brendges, who were very instrumental in keeping this church alive. Those 8 people pledged to unite together to watch over each other for good and to maintain the ordinances of the gospel. That is basically our creed today. We look after each other and we follow the Scriptures. They met in people's homes, but soon a religious revival was taking place in the community, and they were adding new members, so they decided they had to have a meeting home. So somehow, I'm not sure how they acquired this little piece of land, but they built this church, and it started at 1850, I think it was started. That's 185 years ago. Because most of the people lived in Danbury or New Fairfield, it changed its name to the First Christian Society of Danbury and New Fairfield. And in 1914, the name was changed to the Christian Church of King Street. In 1931, the Congregational and Christian Church merged to form the Congregational Christian Church. So that was how we were known then. In 1957, the Congregational Christian Church merged with the Evangelical and Reformed Church to form the United Church of Christ, which we are today. Back to my family. My mom and Dick's dad both were baptized and confirmed by immersion in the pond at the Brick House, which is the big brick house on the way to town. My mom tells about, as a child, Donation Sunday. It always happened in the fall. It was held at the parish house, at the parsonage. We did have a parsonage. If you go up that way off of King Street, it's a long, kind of funny-looking white house. That was our parsonage. And the pastors did live there. And in the harvest time, everybody would come and bring what they had to share, because the poor man didn't make much money. But we gave the potatoes and vegetables out of the garden, and apples and fruit, and whatever they could share for the winter, for the pastor. My mom and dad were married here by the pastor Bassett, and so were Dick's mother and father. Dick was baptized here in 1938. I was baptized here in 1939. During the war, it was a bad time, I guess, most everywhere. During World War II, the church only was open in this late spring and summer and fall. We had supply pastors who would come on Sunday. One of them wasn't even a pastor that I remember, Mr. Brill. He was a professor at Westcon, but he would preach for us on Sunday. And we had one dear man, his name was Mr. Robertson. And as a kid, you know, he sometimes would get bored during the sermon. He always did this, licked his lip. We used to count how many times he licked his lip. And if it was really bad, we'd catch a couple of ladybugs and watch them crawl up and down our arm during the church. The church at that time ended right where it juts out here. And there were 5 pews on each side. The last pew was shorter because there was a wood stove on each side. The stovepipe ran all the way back here to the church where the chimneys were. Behind the church was a carriage shed where people parked their horse and buggy on Sunday morning. There was no bathroom, but I think I was maybe about 10. We acquired the outhouse from down at the King Street School, and put that out in the back, and that was really wonderful because we didn't have to go looking for a tree. During the 40s, the church was at really a low ebb. There were talk of closing it, but a few people who loved this church dearly said, let's keep it open just one more year. And that seemed to be the turning point for our church. It stayed open a year, and it began to grow. After World War II, we acquired a minister, Reverend Martin, who was our part-time pastor. We never could afford a full-time pastor. Mr. Martin had been a missionary in China, and he was interned in a concentration camp during the war. So every Sunday we sang a patriotic song because he said he wanted us to remember how lucky we were to live in this country. Now, Mr. Martin was a visitor. He visited everybody, not just the sick and shut-ins. He would come around on Friday or Saturday, and he'd visit with you, and he'd say, I hope to see you tomorrow on Sunday at church. And if you didn't come to church, he'd come around Sunday afternoon or Monday and say, gee, I didn't see you. Is there some reason you couldn't come? Well, let me tell you, you came to church, but you didn't want to visit like that. Well, Mr. Martin had a dream for our church. He decided we should have a meeting room. So the elders of the church finally gathered together and decided they'd go for it. So they tore down the carriage shed and took off the chimneys, and the stovepipes and the stoves went out. And the men of the church dug the basement themselves. And we all bought cinder blocks, 50 cents a piece. We made all our friends buy them, and we finally had enough cinder blocks that we could build what is now the thrift shop. And it had a kitchen. And I can remember my mother saying how wonderful it was to be able to turn on the tap and get water without having to lug it if we were having something going on all the time. And that was finished in 1948. And we got so proud of ourselves that in 1955, we built the upper level. And we called that the Martin Room. We named it after Reverend Martin. The only problem was the dining room was this upper level. The kitchen was in the basement. So all of us teenagers or young kids, we had to run up and down, bring up the food, bring down the dirty dishes, bring up the food, but it kept us in good shape. In 1960, we got very brave. We had a mortgage, and we built the parsonage that we have still today. And in 1967, we got even more brave, and we built the education wing. In 1979, we had a special service. It was called Burn the Mortgage Service. We burnt the mortgage for the parsonage and the education wing. In 76, we hired Kenneth Landau as our preacher. The search committee went and heard him, and they loved him, and they wanted to hire him right there on the spot. He had just finished, he had been a banker, and this was his second career. And they went down to visit him, and then they went back to his house. And his wife was sure they were not going to Danbury, King Street, Danbury, because she had it confused with Derby, I think. And she said, she fed them tuna fish sandwiches because she knew that he was never going to accept the call to King Street. He had calls to Greenwich and Florida and all kinds of churches. But God spoke to him again and said, yes, you should go to King Street. Well, when he came to King Street, it was an interesting time because the farms were all being sold off, developments were being built, big houses were being built, Union Carbide came in, and executives were buying houses out here in King Street, and we had people from Union Carbide, IBM, General Foods, and a lot of smart people joined the church at that time. And we kept growing, and we kept growing, and pretty soon we were filling the sanctuary. So what did we have to do? We had to make it bigger. So we knocked the wall through to the Martin room, and we added this whole section here. And so it was a big undertaking. We renovated the church, we put new pews in. Those of us who were there bought the old pews. I can't remember how much we paid for them. I have one in my house today. And they painted it, put carpeting down. It was really spiffy looking. So that was our church, and that's what we have here today. Some recollections from my past. Dick and I went to Sunday school every Sunday. His mother was our teacher for many years. I am wearing my Sunday school pins. 6 years of perfect attendance. He has one too. But we went even more years than that, but that was the years we got pins. Thank you. It wasn't really a wonderful thing. My mother just said, get up, it's time to go to church. Some of the superintendents I remember as a child, Don Humphrey, Ted Knapp, Mrs. Patton. And at Christmas, Easter, and Children's Day, we were always expected to recite and perform. When I was 6 years old, I recited, what shall I give him, poor as I lamb? If I were a shepherd, I'd give him what can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I'd give him a lamb. And I forgot what the rest goes already. See that? It's been a long time. But anyway, every Children's Day, we had to recite. When I was 12 years old, Mr. Martin said to me he wanted me to recite The Chambered Nautilus by Oliver Wendell Holmes. So he handed it to me, and I read it, and I thought, I don't understand this thing at all. And I studied it, and I studied it, and I thought I had it under my belt. I got up here on Children's Day. I got about 3/4 of the way through it. I couldn't remember another word, and I had to be prompted. And I said, that's it, I'm never going to recite again. And I never did. But I got to tell you about the Sunday Jimmy Patton recited. He's a nephew of Ibby and Jesse. He was doing, it was Christmas time, and he was doing the night before Christmas. Well, Jimmy didn't stand still. You know, he pranced back and forth across the halls here. And there was a bench up here for a skit we were going to use after a while. He sat on one end of the bench, the other end of the bench was up in the air. He fell off, landed on his bottom, never missed a word. Got through the whole thing. If you went to Sunday school at the King Street Church, you knew the Lord's Prayer, the book of the Bible, 23rd Psalm, the disciples, the 10 Commandments, and all the important stories. We used to have a ribbon, it had a sheep on the top of it. And every time you memorized one of those, you got another little baby sheep on it. And most all of us now, even my own boys can at this day recite the books of the Bible. In the summer, we always had Sunday school picnics. Everybody went. We'd go to Swans Pond or Putnam Park. The last one I remember at J.O. Rogers across the street from us. And we had a raw egg toss, and we had a watermelon spitting contest, and 3-legged races, and we just had a wonderful time. We also had a Halloween party every year. Everybody came, everybody dressed up. And this one year, this person came in and sat down, and we looked. Nobody could figure out who it was. The costume was so wonderful, and everything was hidden. We had no idea who this person was. Until finally, at the end, we found out it was Ruth Tibbetts. She was all dressed up. And of course we had, oh my goodness, we had church fairs and church suppers. That was how we made our money to keep the doors open. I can remember one year when we had a church fair, then we had an auction in the late afternoon, and a supper that night. And the next Sunday, there were some tired people sitting here in the pews. And one year, Lottie Patterson decided she wanted to have that kind of game you had at the Danbury Fair. We had all these different dishes, and when you tossed a quarter, and if it landed in the dish, you got it. Of course, the dishes came from people's house that they didn't want the dishes anymore, but it was fun anyway. But some of the elders of the church said, that's gambling. She couldn't do it. So we got around it. She just charged you a quarter for a washer. You threw the washer, and if it landed in the dish, you took it home. And of course, it came right back to the church because nobody wanted it. But it was fun anyway. Oh, and I got to tell you about Ken Landau. When he came, the first Sunday he came, it was right after that was a church fair. He was such a good sport. He went out there, and they had one of those, clowns with a face out, and he put his face in it. The kids threw sponges at him. He was really a good guy about that. And also, I got to tell you, I was up front with him the first Sunday he preached. So he was so nervous, I went back to see him. And I had to help him put his robe on. He went to the bathroom about 3 times in 10 minutes, and I thought, this man's going to pass out, and I'm going to have to give the sermon. But he didn't. But he gave me some terrible Bible verse, John, from you the other week. The Amorites and the Hittites and the Pessamites, and oh my goodness. I just took a great big breath, and I charged through, got to the other end. I would like to mention just a few people who were instrumental in keeping this church alive. I'd like to mention Don and Helen Humphrey. As I said, they gave the lot for the parsonage. Helen was the treasurer for years. She was the head trustee. She organized and started the Women's Society around 1950. She was the organist. We had an old pump organ, and she pumped away every Sunday. She was the choir director. She sang in the choir, and she was the editor of our bi-weekly Messenger. Originally, the News-Times used to have a King Street part in it once in a while, but it didn't anymore, so she wrote this Messenger. It was all on one sheet, and she would type it, run it off an old mimeograph sheet where you had to crank it, and fold it, address it, put a stamp on it. Every other week we got a Messenger. Had all the news about the church and about anything that was going on in King Street. Don was my superintendent at Sunday school when I was a child. He was a greeter. He greeted everybody. He was an usher. He passed communion. And any time there was a church fair, Don was out there parking cars. Grandma Patton. Now, I'm not being disrespectful for calling her that, because most of her grandchildren were here in Sunday school when we all called her Grandma. She didn't mind. She was our superintendent for quite a few years. She was a member of the Women's Society. But what impressed me about her was whenever we sang hymns in church, she never looked at the words in the book. She knew the words for every hymn we ever sang. And also, she was just full of joy. If you sat near Grandma when church was over, you felt good. J.O. and Catherine Rogers. J.O. had been a lawyer in New York City. So he was the treasurer. He gave legal advice. Catherine Rogers, she had a degree in sacred music from Union Seminary. And they moved up here, and she became our organist. She didn't love our little pump organ, so they bought that organ we have today. She belonged, of course, to the Women's Society. She directed the choir. And every year when we had our church fair, they would go up to Vermont to Crowley's cheese factory and bring back big round cheese things and sell them at the fair. And we have to remember Barbara Westby, who worked in that thrift shop every Thursday morning for years. People would come to the thrift shop just to see her and talk to her. She didn't have a mean bone in her body. And Harriet Mangles always had a great big smile, and sang in the choir, was happy to see everybody, did all she could for the church. Lucy Spear was out there in our cemetery. She was a custodian for years. She also ran the thrift shop. Linda's mom and dad, Mildred and Seth Wibbling. She worked for the Women's Society. She decided that the women should put on a Swedish supper. So she had all the women make Swedish costumes, and we had a Swedish supper. It was a big sellout. People came from all over to our Swedish supper. And her dad, he was good in all kinds of financial matters. He was a trustee. He was instrumental in us getting this parking lot. Before that, it belonged to Miss Carlucci up on the corner. So actually, we had no place to park. It's up down the road. George and Helen Courier. Helen was the Sunday school superintendent, sang in the choir, was a member of the Women's Society. And George, bless his heart, he helped out wherever he could. He was made a deacon, and he said, "I'm not standing up there and be a liturgist." He said, "You'll have to find something else for me to do." So he became our visiting deacon. He visited everybody. He visited the sick and the hospital people, and he visited everybody else. At least once a week, you'd get a knock on the door, and there was George with his great big smiling face, asking, "How's everything?" I talk about my mom. My mom was on the repair committee at the age of 21. She was a Sunday school teacher. She was a founder of the Women's Society. She was a clerk of the church for years, and she was God's housekeeper. She used to walk over here on Saturday, play in the church, walk back home. Now, she didn't drive and didn't have a car. I can remember her on her knees scraping up candle wax off the rug and off the floor from Christmas services. My dad was the official coffee maker. Whenever anything was going on at the church fair, anything that required coffee, my dad made it. He was a custodian of the church for many years. And he also did yard maintenance. The men of the church used to take turns taking care of the yard. So one day, he was out there weed whacking in the cemetery. My sister and I were playing down in the brook. That's what he always did for fun. And he comes over and he says, "Come on, we have to go home." And I said, "Well, you're not done." He said, "Oh, yes, I am." He weed whacked his toe right through his shoe, cut his toe. He had to go get his toe sewed back up. Then he came back and finished his job. I guess I should talk about myself. I've been on every board except the trustees. I've been a deacon many, many times. I was a deacon when Ken Landau was on sabbatical, and I never knew how many people called the church for money and for help. And I didn't know what to do with all these telephone calls. So I can't remember the name of that dear man, but he was the head of ARC. So whenever somebody called me, I'd call him, and he'd tell me, "Yes, that's a legitimate reason," or else he'd say, "Don't give him a penny, he's a scam, he calls every church every week." You know, I know one lady called, and she wanted money for diapers. So I called Steve. Bless Steve full of his heart. He helped me out so much. He said, "Carolyn, I'll tell you what. I'll buy a box of diapers, and I'll take them down. You're not going down there. That's not one of the better sections of Danbury." So he helped me out. Dick has been what do you call it? A yard man. He mowed the lawn many times. He was a trustee. Dave McKee, Sr. He was the night watchman. Every night before he went to bed, he used to take his dog, and they walked around here. He'd check the doors. He'd turn off the lights that people left on. He'd shut off the water people left running. He just looked out for this church. And you know, look at that chandelier up there. Did you ever think about how the light bulbs get changed in that chandelier? You probably never did. Well, Dave McKee had a method. He had these two long sticks with Velcro on the end. He would stand and lean over the balcony, and he'd twist it till he got that bulb out, and then he'd twist it till he got another bulb in. And I tried to do it. I was a failure, I'll tell you that. But he would come over. I'd say, "Dave, the light is out." Over he would come, and he'd fix it. Look around you. Everyone in this church has done something to keep this church alive. Every single person. I just want to mention the choir. Emily. Only been here a few years. She said, I'll be the moderator. Val and Kathy are on the outreach. Bob, Jane, Laura, and Liz are on the worship committee, and Laura is the head of it. John and Heather and Barbara are deacons. I think Barbara's the head deacon. John, he's in charge of everything that goes on in this church. Craft meetings and Special Olympics, and if you want something done, call John. Linda and her soup kitchen. She's been doing that soup kitchen for years. And, you know, I have helped out a few times. One time we were stirring a great big pot of hot dogs. I can't remember who was stirring it, somebody was. One hot dog hopped right out of the pot, went on the floor. We all looked and said, went behind the stove, we couldn't get it out. Well, the cockroaches will eat well tonight. Another time we were making spaghetti sauce. And this fellow was putting some pepper in, the top came off, the whole thing went in. He said, gee, we hope they like spicy sauce. Steve has been so good to this church. He was on the search committee, hunting like crazy till Pastor Paul says, oh, I'll do it. Art, he's held every job in this church. Larry and Bob give freely of their talents. Larry came to be our bell director, and the first Sunday he played in church, he went home and he thought, I like this church, and he stayed ever since. Charlie said, I want to sing with those people, and he joined the choir and he offered to help with Sunday school. And our dear Paul, he came to us when he was a college student with a long ponytail. And he stayed with us. Praise the Lord. I think he loves us. He hasn't left us yet. And the list goes on. Look around. Everybody here has done something, helped in some way. Be on a board, be the moderator, be nursery school, Sunday school, lasagna supper, just whatever we needed. And on the list goes. If you read Liz's weekly word this week, she talked about the fact that every once in a while a thought crossed her mind. It would be nice to just go, sit down, put your dollar in the collection plate, and leave. But that's not what this church is all about. If you're looking for a church like that, this is not it. We are a small, struggling church. But we persevere. But please, always, always remember, God loves this church.
Carolyn, first off, thank you. That was absolutely marvelous. So many stories that I've never had the opportunity to hear being new here. I know a lot of our members have never heard them. Or if they have, they've slipped back into those places in the backs of our consciousness where we're not really aware of them. So it's very important to hear those stories again. I only have one correction to make. You said that I said that nobody cares about the past. I didn't say that. and I'll tell everybody what I said. We were talking about preaching and how nobody just wants the past, because a sermon's purpose is to take the past and to bring it to the present. So you can't just leave it with what happened, to the ancient Acadians. And Carolyn, you didn't leave it with the ancient Acadians. You brought it right here. So that was a lovely sermon, not just a historical narrative. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You mentioned Ken Landau several times, and you should all know that Ken Landau has been in touch with me. And we have been sharing emails back and forth, and he has told me about his time with you and how much you helped him grow as a pastor and how much he loves you and how tickled he is that I get to be here. And so we're doing this whole mutual admiration thing. He also watches our sermon videos on YouTube. So he's going to hear the stories that you were telling him about him. So I'm glad that you told good ones. Tuna sandwiches, huh? So without adding a whole lot more time to the service, because I know that we're moving along, I just wanted to reflect very briefly. You all know that I'm a sailor, that getting out on the water is one of my great loves, and a couple of you have already commented on the fact that I've got a pair of kayaks on top of the Subaru out there that are left over from an outing that my wife and I had yesterday. We were out there paddling among the Norwalk Islands and doing our best to keep from getting run over by the bigger boats coming up the channel. And I was thinking about when I was learning to sail and how the water keeps moving. It's not like you're driving on land. You have to reassess all the time where you are. And the best way to do it, to make sure that you're indeed steering a straight course, is to look behind you, to see the wake coming out from the back of the boat. And if it's snaking all over the place, you've got a problem with your steering. It's when you can look back and you can see the wake straight as an arrow that you know that you finally mastered that art of holding a course. And that's really what Carolyn has given us this morning, a view backwards for the wake, so that we can see where we've been, so that we can make sure that the course that we're charting forward is straight and true as well. And so as we celebrate Anniversary Sunday, we look back, we look forward. We take stock of where we've been. We take stock of where we're going. We remember those saints who have labored and loved here. And we realize that one day, at some Anniversary Sunday, people will be telling stories about the good old days back in 2015. Because we're charting a course forward. We're passing the stories along. We're passing along the community of faith. So may God bless us all as we journey together, looking back over our shoulder from time to time, and then turning and steering forward. God bless. Amen.